We are. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the number 7 in the installment of Recovery Boot Camp and the Schnellenberger Family Foundation Basic Training Family Edition. So I'm glad those of you that started with us at the beginning have stuck with us. And for all the new people, welcome. My name is Rabbi Mark Rotenberg, and I am the minister to the community as well as the case manager here at Recovery Boot Camp. And as always, we start with a moment of gratitude to both the Schnellenberger Family Foundation and RBC, without whose generous everything, we wouldn't be here being able to carry this message to you. And as always, I would like to introduce my very adroit and amazing executive producer, Dave, who's going to handle all the tech and info questions. Yay, Dave.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Mark. Never been called adroit before. I don't even know what that means, but I think it's a compliment, so I appreciate that. So welcome back, everybody. Anyone that's here for the first time, we're happy that you're here. And that kind of leads me into the first bit of information, which is quite simply, we've been doing this, what you said, this is the 7th one. So this is our 7th week doing this, which means if you guys are new or you're joining us somewhere along the way, you've missed a couple of our previous webinars. Don't fret. We actually have them all posted on our website. So you guys can just navigate to recoverybootcamp.com, and on our website, there's a couple tabs. You just click on the one marked Family, and then click on Basic Training Family Edition, and that'll take you right to all the materials, the handouts, the previous webinars, everything you need in order to get caught up. If you struggle with that, don't worry about it. If you guys are on the web-based webinar, you're going to see a couple icons on the right-hand side of your screen. There's going to be one that looks like a little chat bubble. If you click on that, you're going to see where I type in the link that you need to click on to watch any of the past webinars, as well as a couple other bits of information I'm going to post. I always like to mention Nick Johnson. He's our Director of Admissions and Communications. If you guys have any questions related to getting a loved one help or anything in regards to that, what the intake process looks like, if you're curious about our availability for a loved one to come to treatment, reach out to Nick. So in that chat box, I'll also post Nick's email address as well as his phone number. He's a very personable guy, easy to talk to. Definitely reach out to him. I think other than that, yeah, I'm going to let you guys know about, I guess, poll questions. If you're new, we tend to ask some poll questions. If you see them come up, don't be alarmed. They're just yes or no questions, very simple, and your answers are anonymous. So no need to worry if you're embarrassed about answering honestly. You don't need to be. No one's going to see who answered what. But it's really helpful to Mark to steer the conversation. So we ask that you guys answer those questions as quickly as possible so that we can take them down and Mark can see the answers and then talk about the results with you guys. I think we have 7 poll questions tonight. That's our goal. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. Lastly, I think you mentioned the question we ended on last week.
Yeah, plus we weren't able to answer the questions online.
Yeah, so GoToWebinar, the program that we use to bring this to you guys every week, actually had some technical difficulties of their own. So normally what we do is we have you guys write questions. Tonight's no exception. If you guys have any questions related to what Mark is talking about or just any questions that you've been looking for the right person to ask, Mark will field all of them. We'll answer as many live as possible at the end of the webinar during the Q&A. But for any questions that he doesn't answer, he will follow up with email next week. Now, I realize I said that last week, and some of you probably didn't get those responses. It's not Rabbi Mark's fault. GoToWebinar actually had some technical problems, so they weren't able to provide us with a list of your questions, but we did just receive them. So last week's questions, in addition to this week's questions that don't get answered, will definitely be answered probably early to mid next week. So I think that's all I got. Just want to give a quick shout out to my mom, who I did mention last week. She's watching tonight. She's made, I think, everyone. Maybe she missed 1 or 2, but she's been really supportive of this. So I love you, Mom. Thanks for watching.
Yay, Dave. Hi, Dave's mom. Okay, so please don't send me emails that are in all caps because it wasn't my fault I didn't answer the questions. and not my fault. That's a great saying. I think I said it probably 432,000 times in my first 2 years of sobriety. And then I learned that it's kind of my fault. So let's go back to this idea. So we ended last week with a question that someone typed in, and the question was regarding their child who's in treatment and is in a place where they spent a year on the first step. I guess their protocol is 1 step a year. So, and I was kind of caught off guard by it. And Dave actually did a superlative job by jumping in and talking about his experience here. And I wanted to just mention that and go over it again a little bit. Both my personal philosophy as well as recovery boot camps, they are basically congruent 100%. And the reason that I actually chose this facility to work at was because, for that exact reason, that the impetus and the express impact and the drive for step work in this facility in recovery boot camp is amazing. And I'm not going to say that there aren't other paths to recovery. What I'm going to say is continuously for the longest amount of time with the most amount of available data, even though that's one of the downsides. People say there's no quantifiable tracking data. There is, in fact, it exists within Alcoholics Anonymous and all 12-step fellowships through various ways of tracking. Some are survey-based and others are a little bit sneakier. But there are solid numbers for the General Service Organization and what Alcoholics Anonymous World Service puts out. And we see that consistently the single most effective protocol for long-term recovery is a 12-step paradigm. And what we know now, and we mentioned it in the slides last week, is it's because even if we divorce the 12-step ideal from any pseudo-religious or spiritual nature, what we find is that it does contain the 3 most effective cognitive therapies, the behavioral change approaches: CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy; DBT, dialectic didactic behavioral therapy; and finally NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And that is the thing that is the most important to us here at Recovery Boot Camp. And the question was open-ended. And what we do is we actually demand unequivocally that the clients finish their 5th step prior to stepping down to the OP. So that's after a 3-month run. And we want them to do the steps rapidly, but with equal zeal, we want them to do it in depth and thoroughly. And so as the professionals here, we can monitor their work. We bring in the basic training idea to the clients, which is recovery dynamics, where it's a really in-depth look at the steps and how they work clinically. And then we attach the spiritual paradigm to them. So we dovetail 2 different ideas so we can monitor the intensity of their work. And then their sponsor, who they're doing the steps with, is the one who is the final arbiter of the efficacy. And they can really speed up or dial down the speed within the confines that we demand, which is that prior to step down, a 5th step has to be done. And we find that that not only brings relief initially, but it opens the door for the healing that the rest of the steps will bring, because the steps themselves grant freedom. And once you have freedom from those pains, specifically, you never need relief again. So tonight we're going to start on, do I have to click this, Dave? Probably, right?
I think
The Dussel dongle. All right. So tonight we're going to start on number 64 for those of you that have it, which would hopefully be everybody. And let me just remind you. So when we switched gears and went from the end of the spiritual talk on the recovery model into the signs, the overarch of the signs of surrender, I said that my goal from this moment forward is to train you to be, in effect, your own treatment professional. And what we're trying to do is make you a lay professional in the treatment modality so that you yourself, right, can come to the place where you, our hope for you is that you can assess your own family's needs, your own family members' needs who are in treatment or need to be in treatment. And from the information that you gather from the signs of success, the signs of surrender, the phases of recovery, and then we're going to expand those two things into the family. How we address the family phases of recovery and the family signs of surrender, that you can form boundaries, you can limit your enmeshment, you can dampen your enabling, draw true boundaries between helping and enabling, right? And that's our goal, right? To inform you to the best of your ability, since every single case is unique to the dynamic of the family and the situation involved and all the other factors that come in. Because as we've already learned, if nothing else, you've had to learn that this is a multifaceted disease with many, many factors and factorials, and has to be addressed from multiple angles. So the best thing we can do for you is to train you, in essence, to be somewhat of a treatment professional, so that you can work on yourself, get your own mental health better, and by extension, write boundaries that are solid and stable for your family member to help them achieve their goals of long-term recovery. So that being said, let's move to our first slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the signs of surrender for the IP. The IP is the identified patient. And we covered them in brief last week, and we have quite a bit of, let me just scroll this down, quite a bit of information to cover. My goal is that we get through like 24 slides today. Fingers crossed, I'm hoping it'll happen. So our first thing that we covered last week in brief was this idea of no longer being defensive. Okay, so one of the very first signs that the patient is surrendering is that they do not actually fight everything you say to them. There is not a rebuttal. Personally, I can tell you that my own alcoholism and drug addiction put me in the mindset for years. When someone talked to me, I immediately had to perceive them as an authority, whether they were or not. And I immediately listened to the first 3 words of their conversation, then shut down completely and spent the majority of my time while they were speaking formulating my rebuttal. Okay? But when we talk about this defensiveness, we're talking about defense that is along the lines of denial. And the first type of denial is denial number 1, oddly enough. And we call it the known unknown. The interesting thing about this denial is that originally the person knows that it might be false or faulty. And what they do is they sublimate that because of a benefit that they receive in that denial, whether it's a payoff, chasing girls, or getting high, or gambling, or anything that has this visceral reward. The logic of it can be sublimated so that they can have this. And if they do that long enough, it becomes the known unknown. At one time it was known, and now it's unknown. And this is the interesting thing. It becomes an unknown idea. The second type, which is even more vehement, is the unknown unknown, which is a whole nother ballgame. In essence, what occurs is that they don't know that they don't know the lie. And so it creates a deeper, almost like guttural version of denial. And so this is really, really hard to understand, because it's not malicious, right? Many, many times they feel as though they are in possession of the truth. In fact, that is the number 1 characteristic of this denial, that not only I'm a liar, but I'm not maliciously lying. That means not only am I unaware that my falsehoods are malicious and wrong, but on top of that, I actually believe that I am in possession of the truth. Which brings us to our first poll question. And that question is if denial works to reinforce a false narrative, can it ever be defeated? Are you watching the live feed of the Answers come in.
Results are pouring in.
Pouring in. Awesome. I like pouring in results. Whoa. Drop my water cap.
All right, results are in.
The results are in, and they are 86% of you, the vast majority, believe that denial can, in fact, be defeated. Awesome answer. And how do we know that? Well, we know it because it's true. Because if it weren't, no one would be able to heal and recover from any addiction, whether it was a substance or a process. So how exactly do we do it? If denial operates to make me think that I have the truth and that false narrative becomes the ultimate truth for me, how do I break it? And that's why you find that addicts and alcoholics become superlative liars, because if I'm trying to convince you of something that I know is faulty, I'll be hard pressed to do it. But if I believe the veracity of that idea myself all the way to my core, whether by training myself to or being mistaken in that idea, it's going to be a lot easier for me to convince you. So really the only way that we can do that, and this is one of the main things that we do here at RBC, is we fight those denials, all the different levels of them, through the process of, I got to do another click, attrition. The only way to break that denial is the constant hammering, a war of attrition against those facts, repeatedly hitting them with the truth. Because if I believe I have the truth and you tell me the truth once or twice, I'll be like, you're mistaken, your opinion. But if you hit at me with it over and over again, and you show me the veracity, you show me the truth, you show me the data, and you show me your experiential reality, then it will crack that for me. And we see that example in the rock versus water. All of you have probably at one time been by a stream where there's a rock sticking out and the top of the rock is gnarled and jagged. But when you reach underneath, you got to be careful because you can slip on that rock because it's smooth as silk. Well, we know for a fact that the rock is harder than the water. I mean, dive off a diving board into an empty swimming pool. It's gonna hurt. But if it's full of water, not so much. So how does this occur? It occurs with the constant rubbing, the constant friction, the attrition of the truth, the water being analogous to the truth, wearing away those stubborn rough edges, wearing away those denials and delusions, finally exposing the truth. And this is not a modern idea. I mean, it's really not. In fact, I'm going to get a little bit on the rabbi side now, and I'm going to talk to you about Isaiah. So one of the prophets in the Jewish scriptures in the Old Testament is Isaiah, right? Isaiah writes a line. He says, the heart of the people is fat, the eyes are shut, and the ears are plugged, lest they feel with their heart, see with their eyes, and hear with their ears. Understand the truth, they would have to repent and be healed. That it is so hard. I mean, we're talking about, a prophet, a biblical prophet writing about denial as a human condition, 3,000 years before Freud? So again, it absolutely can be damaged, but it has to be through attrition. So now let's move on. The next one we're going to talk about, which is the next sign of surrender, is the willingness to live in the moment, in the here and now. And the reason this is so difficult for addicts and alcoholics to do is because it's generally difficult for everyone to do. Because you can't think yourself into the moment. The moment is organic, it's natural, and in fact, truly being in the moment takes you out of the timeline. It's like, say you're standing in line at the post office on your lunch hour. You got 20 minutes to mail the thing. There's 40 people in front of you, and all you're thinking is, oh my God, I'll never get through this. I'm going to miss my lunch. And all of a sudden, somebody taps you on the shoulder. It's a friend you haven't seen in 5-6 years. You start chatting and chatting. And all of a sudden, a minute, 2 minutes go by, and the lady's like, sir, and you turn around, and there's nobody there. Because in that moment, being in the moment of that interaction with that person, right? It's the I-thou connection. Buber talks about it at length. It pulls you out of the space-time continuum. And why is it so hard for addicts in recovery to get into that? Is because they love that space, because that's the space they were every time they got high. Drugs were absolutely the path for them to be in the moment, right? And the way to do that was to remove the existential pain and other things in their brain. And they did that with painkillers. Painkillers, alcohol, everything kills the pain. Even if it's not listed as a painkiller specifically, it works. It brings you into the moment. The only time you are vested and outside of what's going on in the moment is when you're high. And the reason they call them painkillers is because they kill all pain, physical, emotional, and all that. So one of the other major factors of being in the moment is the act of surrender. Another thing that's blocking for addicts and alcoholics, as well as regular people, because the majority of the world perceives the word surrender with a negative connotation, that it's bad. Well, you may or may not know by this time that I really like the Oxford English Dictionary, and the Oxford English Dictionary simply defines its first definition of the word surrender as joining the winning side. That's it. I don't lose. I join the side that wins. And in that switch, I become part of the winners. And the third thing that really prevents people from living in the here and now is resentment. Now, resentment's an interesting word. Most of us think that it's a viable, brutal anger. But if we look at it, the Latin derivation, it comes from the idea of to rethink or refeel. And I absolutely am an alcoholic. And like most human beings, I'm reticent to accept my own culpability in the bad things that happen to me. Only for me as an alcoholic, that becomes deadly. So every time I replay that story in my head, I alter the facts ever so slightly. And by doing that, I slowly but surely eliminate my own responsibility, my own culpability for the negative thing that occurred to me. And I arrive at my favorite place on earth, the state of complete victimhood. Because if I am a victim to everything and everyone, then I am totally now entitled to do whatever I want, to get what I want when I want it, by hook or by crook, by any means necessary, because I have it coming. So again, one of the major signs is that your loved one is actually in the moment, talks about what's going on, explains something that was transformative or happened to them, not a bunch of weird things. They're like, I'm doing great. I could use, a Western Union for a bunch of money. No, they're actually being in the present. And one of the things that keeps them out of the present and drives the majority of manipulation is fear. Okay, so let me ask another poll question. Is fear healthy? It's a simple question. Is fear healthy?
All right, looks like the votes are in. Ready?
Yep. Excuse me. The votes are in, and 88% of you think that fear is healthy. Okay, awesome. Well, organic fear that's phobic centric, like personal survival fear, like, I don't know, don't sleep in the high grass where the lions hang out. Common sense fears, don't walk on the railing of a bridge, don't drive into the hood and wave a gun. I don't know, whatever. Sure, it can be safety fear, But in terms of health, it may not be so healthy, because I'm not talking about, ooh, I'm afraid of spiders because I don't want to get bit, or I have a natural revulsion to snakes. Okay, those are fine. Good idea. Stay away from snakes. I'm talking about the fear that exists in the contemplative part of our brain. And that part is the part, oh, I didn't double click it. And that part is the part where fear equals false evidence appearing real. So what we do is we create a narrative which we reinforce as being true, which is driven by a fear that is not real, but it creates a reality, and it drives us and changes our ability to make choices. So certain fears, granted, are real, but the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, wrote at length about this. Specifically was a topic in a book that he wrote later on in his years called Language of the Heart. It's accumulation of writings after he'd really become sophisticated in his understanding of this process. And he says that fear is generally unhealthy across the board. What is healthy is what people call fear, but is actually prudence. He discerns between those two. He says fear is unrational, it's irrational, it drives you, it steals your chance for free will, and it's false evidence appearing real that you believe, and you sabotage yourself. He says prudence, on the other hand, is a more vigilant type of way. It is concern without worry. It is a practical concern without the influx of emotional drama. Let's bring a little quote from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is from page 68, and it says, "We wrote down our fears even though we had no resentments in connection to them. And we asked ourselves, why do we have these fears? Why do we have them? Was it not because self-reliance failed us?" Right? Well, without going into too much detail, we're actually going to cover it at length, specifically the pathology of it, in a few more slides. We end up understanding that I have fear because of my own power. I don't have the ability to succeed that much because the world, by definition, we spoke about this when we talked about the spiritual reality, is larger than me. It is greater than me. And when I exert the power that I possess to control the circumstance of my own volition without help, without input, without empowerment, I'm destined to fail. And that failure is what increases my fear. So I have a fear not based in reality. I overcompensate for it by myself. That fails, reinforces the fear, which now becomes real and now becomes more solid, and then drives me more and more. And that, in essence, becomes a circle of fear, an inventory of how I lose my ability to make rational decisions. Let's move on. The next major sign in surrender for the identified patient is the willingness to follow direction. And the thing that stands in the way of that, now when I say these things stand in the way, I'm trying to give you an understanding of how you can judge where they're at. Are they willing to follow direction, or do they still remain defiant, right? Interestingly enough, the identified patient, the client, they will reject any idea or any direction from an authority figure, just on the simple basis that it wasn't their idea. I can't tell you how many times people have told me, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And I'm like, no, not my idea. Stupid idea, not my idea, your opinion. Really, for whatever reason, the alcoholic here is in defiance about any ideas coming from any authority, either real or imagined, because what we know is defiance is the number one characteristic of the addict and alcoholic. And it has to be, because without defiance, the denial would shatter immediately when negative events started to happen as a result of using, and they wouldn't be able to continue being addicts. They would be forced into a circumstance of treatment. On top of that, addicts are thieves. They steal things. They steal everything. right? So on one hand, they're not taking direction, but on the other hand, they steal everything, which means they steal ideas, only they steal bad ideas. And the worst part is that they actually consider themselves competent. So this is a problem, right? So they consider themselves confident thieves. So let's move on. So we're still in this idea of defiance. So I consider myself a competent thief. Wow, it doubled out. I don't know. Okay, we'll just go through them all. So I consider myself a competent thief. And what do I steal? I steal trust from all the people I love. I steal money. I steal time. I steal love. I steal everything. It doesn't have to be money. I'm a thief. Because I'm a victim, I believe I'm entitled to get what I think I need, and I'm going to take it if need be. So I steal everything. But the truth is, I just went the wrong way again. The truth is that I am, in fact, it's doubling down now, Dave. I don't know why. But here we go. We're just going to have two exposed at once. The truth is that I am an idiot when it comes to being a thief. Because here's the deal. You tell me to do something, and I reject it because it's not my idea, because I feel that you're oppressing me with your opinion or your desire, your authority. Yet I'm willing to steal everything else around. And I think I'm pretty good at it because I've done so well this far. But here's the truth. It never even dawns on me, not even once, because I'm not an idiot. I recognize that when you tell me to do something, it may be a good idea. I may even go, that's a good idea, but I'm not doing that. I mean, how many times have you been, I'll show you I'm not an alcoholic, and I go to drink as the proof text that I'm not an alcoholic. It's ridiculous. It never dawns on the active alcoholic that if they just steal the good idea, it now becomes theirs. If they just take the idea that is good and they're resistant to being told what to do, they steal everything else, steal the good idea, and it's now your idea. In essence, recovery is the process of learning to steal sound ideas instead of stealing poor ideas. We steal sound ideas. Let's move on to the next one. So the next thing that we're talking about, where is it? There it is. The next thing that we're talking about is, again, this willingness to follow direction. So if I can turn that corner and say, you know what, I still may be defiant and I still think I know better, but I'm going to use that intellect and say, now that's a good idea. I'm not going to do it because they tell me. I'm going to do it because I'm going to steal it, and it's now my idea, which is fine. It runs into now an issue. So this is the issue, the higher power. I can steal from human people, but how do I steal from a higher power of my own conception? So let me ask a simple question. And one of the reasons that I can't even think I can steal is because I'm kind of mad at the universe in general, because remember, I'm a victim because I replay the tape and I never have any part in what happened. So here's the next whole question. Do you believe that your loved one has a resentment towards God and or religion? My ears are hot today. Maybe it's God telling me to ask the right question. Maybe it's God telling me to ask this question. Maybe it's the lights. Does your loved one, to your belief and understanding, do you feel that they have a resentment towards God or religion? Right?
And obviously we're talking about the addicted one.
Correct. The addicted
The
family
alcoholic.
member. The alcoholic or addict, correct.
All right, looks like mostly everyone has responded. Closing the poll. Results are in.
Wow, 62%. I'd like to hear what the 38% think. I'd be curious to know if you've even ever asked your loved one whether they have a resentment, right? Well, we need to unpack this idea of a higher power. And really, because AA and 12 steps in general has this kind of immediate pseudo-religious kind of idea amongst the general public, when we talk about a higher power, people immediately run to the concept of God. When we talk about power greater than yourself, you immediately run to the concept of God. And a lot of people, I would say the vast majority that come to recovery, I don't know if they have per se resentments towards God or religion, but they definitely have baggage. Whether you come from a deeply religious and strict environment or completely atheistic and, I don't know, secularly human or whatever it is, you're going to bring with you that almost genetic memory through the generations of your family to that point. And you're going to bring those things with you, and it's going to cause you to have preconceived notions. And what we try to talk about is that higher power initially does not have to be God, because most addicts consider themselves victims of God or some universal conspiracy. I mean, why am I an alcoholic? Why did you pick me? Why do I have disease? Why can't I get anything right? Why? Well, if we come with that, we're going to have a little issue. So what we can do is initially, and what we do here at Recovery Boot Camp is we start initially baby steps. Take it away from the big picture. First of all, it's hard to conceive of. Sometimes it's hard to construct in your head. And a lot of times we carry baggage. So let's bring it to a practical, corporeal, touchable reality. And understand that there are, in fact, practical powers that are greater than yourself that you can connect to and use those to empower yourself. Specifically, let's have some examples. I don't know, a sponsor, someone who has suffered the same thing, who you trust, who you know has been in the same place as you, but has had a dramatic result, and you're going to follow his direction.
We're having a little technical difficulty. Can we stop for a second?
We can absolutely stop for a second.
Okay. Little webcam issue.
Uh-oh.
I'm just going to reset it.
Oh, am I garbly?
It's just a little pixelated. Not to worry, though.
It's all right. You just need to hear what I want to say. You don't really need to see me. I'm not all looking. Oh, look, now I'm on the side. Different angle. That's actually kind of cool, the side view.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
There you go. You are not pixelated now.
I'm not, but I do just want to.
That's way clearer. Awesome. So hopefully I'm less pixelated. Hopefully I'm not. Doesn't matter. I can't see myself anyway. So your sponsor could be a practical power greater than yourself, where you could take his information, knowledge, his experience, you could internalize it, you could receive it, and you could go from there to become empowered. I don't need to see myself.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Dave needs to see me. There I am. Awesome. Back to regular.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave. See, if I had to do this, it would just be slides. You wouldn't hear me. There'd be no sound or anything. It would be bad. So, willingness to follow direction, higher power, HP. Does it have to be God? No, not immediately. I mean, it seems like the logical destination, but initially we tend to have resentments, so we stay away from that. And here, like at RBC, we start with incremental, easy things. Sponsor, right? Practical empowerments. How about your peers, your friends, people that you witness changing as you watch in the moment? It's amazing. What about the big book? That book and the Other texts of 12-step are filled with information, experience, and empirical knowledge and data that I do not possess. I want to get empowered. I want that. So what do? I read it. I practice it. I utilize it. Even if I don't believe in its efficacy, I pretend to, and it starts to work, and the pretense that it will fades away. And all of a sudden, I've been empowered. I have mentors, people that I listen to, speakers, people that I trust, clergymen, friends, I don't know, all kinds of mentors, right? All promote practical and practicable techniques. And these really are the part of cognitive and dialectic and didactic behavioral therapy. I get empowered by the information. I practice it. It changes. It causes me to want more change, which makes me then study and learn more, which I then practice and over and over and over. It becomes an expanding cycle as opposed to my addiction, which was a compressing one. Willing to follow direction again. Now, once we can bring the client to that place of understanding that there are practical, tangible ways, now we can open the door into the higher power that is specifically the ethereal, the mystical, the biblical, the quantum. You know, without getting into a huge theological debate, it's very simple. Bible says God spoke the world into existence. Sound came before matter. Science says the Big Bang. It's not called the Big Shh. It's the bang. Power before matter. And sound before matter. Energy into matter preceded by sound. This is how we make things happen. I'm transmitting something by sound and creating, hopefully, in you an idea that will empower you to do something. It's the same process on a micro level. We see it every day. That's how we bridge the idea of practical to ethereal. And what we get vis-a-vis empowerment from the ethereal realm is slightly different. It gives us things like hope, desire, and motivation. So we have really two areas that we can become empowered: the mystical and the practical. I go to meetings, I do my book work, I read, I listen to my sponsor, I do my writing. These are practical, pragmatic things that I can engage in. Discipline. And I can increase my ability to be good at those with practice. The problem is, how do I practice being motivated or having hope or having desire? I can't. But what we find is that when we start with the practical higher power, the practical way of empowerment, doing those things allows me to receive, without even working all that hard, these other things, the mystical areas, the hope, the desire, the motivation, the commitment. These things, I open myself up to the mystical empowerment through the practice of the practical ones. Again, willingness to follow direction. How do I get to that point? It says muted, Dave. Can they not hear? Can you guys hear? That was a good part. Can they hear me now?
Yeah.
If you guys weren't able to hear, just.
They can hear. They're saying yes.
Oh, you guys are awesome. Yes. I should probably not look at this screen at all. It always gets me into trouble. So another one of the things that you can see as a sign of surrender under this umbrella of willingness to follow direction is people start to be able to differentiate for themselves between their own idea of will. See, will gets a bad rep because we hear, oh, it's just have some willpower and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stop shooting heroin in your neck. It's not going to happen. And really, that lends to the idea, the stigma, regenerates the stigma in society. So we have to talk about will, but we have to talk about will correctly. So let me ask a simple question. We're now on another poll question, and it's simply this. Are free will and self-will the same? Seems weird to me that there's like dead air. You guys answering?
Oh, they're answering.
Oh my
The
goodness.
results are almost all in.
Almost all in. Important.
I'm going to close the polls now.
Oh, too late. Yes, 20%, no, 80%. Okay, at the risk of wagging my finger at you, you're wrong. There is absolutely a difference between free will and self-will. Wait, did I say it wrong? No, they believe that they're the same, and they answered their
20% think they're the same.
My
80%
bad.
think they're
mea culpa, that they're
80%
different.
were.
Ah, so I re-wagged my finger at me for wagging my finger at you. Mea culpa. I was wrong, you were right. And you are correct. There is absolutely a difference between free will and self-will. So let's approach it so we can all be on the same page. Well, what is will? Well, the definition of will is simply the facility to manifest a choice. I have a thought. I want to do something. I make that decision in a willful way. I manifest that choice in my action. The facility to make that idea real. So if we assume that it's in essence a choice, then what is self-will? Well, self-will are the choices based on self. And as an addict and alcoholic who's active, I can safely say that before I got sober, what I truly knew about myself was minuscule at best. I literally had a delusional identity, a fraudulent self. Remember, we talked about this at the very beginning as Dr. Silkworth defines the clinical diagnosis of the alcoholic, the outright mental defective in full flight from reality, living way over there in Technicolor. Because myself has been so foreign to myself for so long that I end up saying, don't you know who I think I am? As opposed to who I am. And I don't know because I live in this delusional world, which means that if I'm making choices based on self and I don't know who that self is, or that information is faulty, so is the choice. I mean, granted, I'm going to get it right once in a while. Everybody gets lucky, broken clock twice a day, you know. But the truth is if I'm making decisions based on bad information, most assuredly those decisions are going to be wrong. And we see that when we first come to recovery, because if I'm looking at my choice to be sober, I'm asking, well, do I want to be sober? But I don't know if I want to be sober. So in essence, do I have really a free will choice to come to recovery, or is it still driven by what I think I am in that moment? And what I think I am in that moment is completely based on my circumstances. And so in fact, my choice to come to recovery is not a free will choice. It's self-driven because it's about how I think I am in the horrible circumstances of my life. Only when I start to get information that is unfettered by delusion and denial, then it moves into the realm of free will. That means I'm not clouded. I'm not operating under faulty premises. I have facts and I can start to make decisions. And that's the shift from the external motivation of entering recovery to the internal motivation of staying sober and staying in recovery. And really, those choices become based on fact, not on emotional lability, which is my up and down emotional spirals that continue to happen. So I wanted to get through 21, but we've gotten through 9, which means I am an abysmal failure. And I'm going to go home and cry about it and probably put it on my 10 step. But we are at that time. And Dave looks like he has some questions that
Oh
need
boy,
to be
do I.
answered. Oh boy, do I. I do
Ready?
not
So-
like the sound of that.
Well, we got some really good questions this week.
Okay.
However, there's a pretty good amount, so we want to be honest, thorough,
And quick, I get it.
and brief.
Yeah, not my forte.
Well,
Sorry.
we'll do our best. So,
All right, I will personally try my best.
okay, so here is here's the first question. And also remember, everybody, if you do have questions, even if we don't get to them live, send them our way. We'll answer them at a later date.
I will email you.
Probably Monday, Tuesday.
That's when I try to get to them at the beginning of the week.
But if you don't get us the questions before we end the webinar, we're not going to be able to see them.
Oh.
So just in case, get your questions in. So even if we don't get to them live, we'll be able to answer them in a follow-up email on
Good
Monday.
point. So write them now and we'll get to them later.
Okay, so first question.
Yep.
How do you get someone in the position to start hearing the truth? My son doesn't think he has a problem and moved out of my house after overdosing last Saturday.
Ooh, well, you have to confront him with the facts over and over and over and over and over again. And a lot of times he will in fact confront himself with his own facts. He moved out of your house, which means that either he's going to start paying rent or he's going to couch surf. The patience of his friends, if he's couch surfing, is going to wear thin, especially if he's prone to getting high in their house and they are not part of that scene. And even if they are, it's going to get thin because active addicts don't like the stress of possibly having the police and paramedics around, so they tend to avoid that. What you can do is have a boundary and tell them, okay, you want to make this decision? That's fine. I'm going to love you to life by letting you make that decision, which means your cell phone, which I presently may or may not pay for, I'm definitely not going to pay for. Your car insurance, which I may or may not pay for, I'm definitely not going to pay for. Your car per se, which may or may not be in my name, if it is definitely going to be in my garage. And you now get to be the adult who makes adult decisions and decides to live with the ramifications of those choices. Or you can go talk to somebody who can do an eval and maybe call Nick and talk to him on the phone and see if maybe you can come to a determination that, you know what, maybe I've been in denial, maybe I haven't. But what we find is that when addicts talk to other addicts who have transcended, they're a lot more able to tell the truth than when they tell their parents. And that just tends to be the way it works. They were more apt to talk to someone else who's been through the experience than they are to talk to somebody who they believe doesn't understand them. And unfortunately, that's what tough love and true boundaries are about. Forcing an intervention on the person you love and loving them to life instead of possibly loving them to death.
Okay, so I'm going to try and pull a question out of this one. It's more of a statement with a question involved, but it's just definitely
It's a question.
It says, my husband and I are still trying to decide whether to turn our 21-year-old daughter into the police or not. She stole debit cards and checks and stole way more than that as well. So what should they do?
Turn them into the police. Yeah. Listen, if they stole from you and you feel that that's inappropriate, then you can actually do a personal intervention. You can say, listen, we know that you stole from us and that we know that what you're using it for, and we understand, and we're not ill-informed anymore, and we're starting to become educated about the truth of this disease. And if you're willing to go to treatment and you're willing to try to get your life in order and try to become sober and don't want to live like this anymore, then we are willing to postpone that reality. But if you don't, we are within our rights to call the police. I mean, the entitlement that you think you deserve to take what we've worked for to fuel your habit is an untenable circumstance. And unfortunately, we cannot live with that anymore. And if it's theft of other people, then, it's your obligation to not allow your child to really terrorize other people, to perpetrate on other people, and to victimize them. My experience, as well as the numbers, show that for first-time offenders, there tends to be leniency, especially with adjudication into treatment. And as well as what we know for a fact is that people that have legal ramifications, secondary and tertiary motivation to stay sober, tend to get sober longer and more effectively in their first try. It tends to be a higher rate when there's multiple factors involved. Right?
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. This is in this is a question based on what you were talking about connecting to a higher power.
Correct.
This
Not like that's my wheelhouse.
This mom says, this is one of my son's primary points of defiance,
Of course it is.
as he is a confirmed atheist.
All righty.
So how does she handle that situation?
Pretty simple. Alcoholics Anonymous and every 12-step fellowship on the planet is not inherently a pseudo-religious cult, and in fact does not demand belief in anything. What it does, however, demand is the suspension of disbelief. And if he considers himself open-minded, erudite, and educated, and flies in the face of the opiate of the masses, that classic religion that people need who are weak-willed, ask him simply, well, has your science been able to stop you from putting your life at risk? And if it hasn't, maybe you can just say there is possibly some power in the universe that operates to hold this system in check that is greater than me. And if that's true, and I work on a systemic reality or a systems dynamic principle, you could also understand that the true atheist would know that when they fight against the system continuously outside the allowable parameters, then the system, because it's greater than the individual part, will course correct and remove that cog from the equation. There are also Atheist Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and Atheist Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and there are meetings that are atheist all over the place. It's a little easier for me personally to surrender in a third step to some ethereal, somewhat nebulous concept that I have of my own power than to surrender to my sponsor and two of his friends and then have to do every single thing they say or risk getting kicked out of that particular sponsorship family. For me, God's a little bit more yielding than three guys that want to make sure I stay sober. But there are, in fact, atheist groups, and I believe 2 years ago, I was on an area panel and they were working on an atheist pamphlet for atheist members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It may actually be out this year. So there are options.
Awesome. So we're coming up on 9 o'clock, so we're going to keep going for about another 10 minutes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. And this one is actually a good question. It might be a good way to talk about what we do here and why we're gender specific.
Sure.
This
Excellent.
question says, is going into recovery as a couple better than not going into recovery at all? Or if we do go into recovery as a couple, is it doomed to failure?
Okay. So if the reason you're not going into recovery is because you need to be with your co-patient, then you're kind of doomed to failure. The truth is that couples, especially using couples, if they are addicts like I am, really operate under a faulty premise of who they are, which means that their relationship, though they believe it to be the truest thing they ever had, you probably hear things like, no one's ever known me more than this person. She knows my authentic self, or he knows my trueness, right? Yeah, they don't, because you don't, which means that getting sober would probably shear the single most strong bond that you have. And if you go in recovery together, the chances that you're going to get sober are way, way, way lessened. And in fact, gender specific tends to be the best because women have specific issues, men have specific issues. Their brains operate differently. They process information differently. For instance, Recovery Boot Camp, we are specifically geared towards men. But that doesn't mean that everyone that works here is men. In fact, we have women therapists specifically to bring that kind of approach and understanding from the other side, even though we have a men's population. Men here can bind and find a unique way, because men specifically, I mean women as well, in the addictive community, tend to turn their relationships into using relationships, not just in terms of drugs, but using for validation from someone else who will co-sign my bullshit, excuse the expression, and allow me to feel okay because they're with me. I'm validated because you like me, because I don't like myself. So initially, most addicts and alcoholics have really deep intimacy problems. And we talked about it a week ago in the slide when we answered the question, why am I an alcoholic? It says in the 12 and 12 that defective relationships with other human beings have nearly always been the immediate cause of my problems, including my alcoholism. I am an addict because I never knew how to have real relationships because I never thought I was good enough to have one. So I had to be fraudulent. So that's the first part. They need to be separated, and we focus on that strongly here at RBC because in order to develop intimacy, you have to start from a position where there's not even the possible hint of some weird sexual gratification and validation, where you can be open intimacy. This sounds weird, but into me you see. I'm open and exposed to you without the extra threat of being rejected sexually, which is drastic for both the male and female ego. And the relationships themselves are damaged. Here's an interesting thing. So I was an authentic, let's say my authentic reality when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old was a loving, caring, compassionate guy. Then I became an alcoholic and a drug addict. And then I met the one who was also a drug addict and alcoholic, but now I started to act compassionate and loving and caring and attentive. Was I being my authentic self as that drug addict, or was I a drug addict pretending to be my authentic self? So the drug addict is not authentic, and the drug addict pretending to be authentic is not authentic either. With that kind of dynamic, seldom are those relationships going to work out. My suggestion is to find separate treatment facilities, and that, again, gender specific, because in mixed facilities, anything to distract me from the work at hand and feeling bad about myself, recognizing what I've done, I can run to some sort of attention and affirmation from someone from the opposite sex and just be like, oh, okay, I'm not that bad. I am that bad. That's why I'm here. And allow yourself to grow, because a single person's health is never as strong as someone else's sickness. And together, you will not pull each other up. It's inevitable that you will pull each other down, which is specifically why this particular facility is gender specific. That's what Recovery Bootcamp understands, is the key to having sexual and interpersonal intimate relationship with the other gender is learning to have the template of friendship, of intimacy with the same gender. It's very important.
So now this question is more geared towards manipulation.
Ooh.
Specifically talking about God and higher power. It says, how do you know when to look past the parroting and manipulation of the addict using God or a higher power to draw you back in to thinking they are okay, when in fact it's just another artful manipulation or facade?
Ooh, it's a good question. It's very complex. And again, the reason that we're spending so much time on these particular slides on recognizing the signs of surrender, the willingness to follow direction, and not being defensive, is that so you can sift through that kind of nonsense, right? But if you want a simple, basic answer, one of my favorite yardsticks, like measuring tools, right, is this. You know, it only says 23 minutes on the elapsed time. Don't worry about it. Okay, so this is my favorite measuring stick, right? When I hear someone talking spiritually, talking about God, talking about how they've changed and how they've entered a new paradigm of consciousness, and when they mess up, which we do mess up, when they say, oh, yeah, that's okay, progress, not perfection. That's when I know they're starting to use that spiritual shield as an excuse to do some shady behavior in the hopes of like using that to say, yeah, but I'm going to make amends, or I'm going to fix it. Because, you know, the book says progress, not perfection. I'm not striving. Well, first of all, they're wrong. It's not what the book says. The book specifically says these words: we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, which means nobody claims spiritual perfection. Don't wrap themselves in the zealotry of some religious paradigm or spiritual paradigm to continue to behave badly under the vague idea that I'm working towards enlightenment. No, I try to do the right thing. I mess up. When I do, I remedy it. I amend it immediately. That's how I strive towards perfection, but never claim it because I'm human. So it's a case by case. It takes you to be a bit of a detective to do it. But my best advice is to ask more questions and make them leading so that they give you extraneous information about what's going on and what their motivation is. Open dialogue is the best way to find someone's the authenticity and veracity of what they're doing and saying. It's the best way to judge. And when you learn these things, trust me, your bullshit detector will get better, 100%.
Okay, so I think I'm going to ask, we have time for one more question.
We only did 5 minutes. You said that we were going to do 10.
Yeah, well, you give 5-minute answers, Mark.
That was 3 answers in 5 minutes.
You're doing good. You're doing good. Okay.
I'm going to give a 5-minute answer just because. I'll show you. I'll drink when you call me an alcoholic.
Okay, let's see what to ask. So many questions, so little time. Okay. What about the addict? So this is this person's sister, is the addict.
Okay.
She's an adult with a husband, 2 young kids, and a full-time job.
Awesome.
Question is, how do we get her to stop verbally abusive behaviors towards those of us who are trying to help? I'd imagine trying to get her to
encourage her to change or seek help. Okay. All right, read it again. So how do we stop the verbal responses?
She's an adult with a husband, 2 young kids, and a full-time job. And it sounds like the family is pretty unified in trying to get her help, and she's being verbally abusive as a response.
Okay. Well, so one of the problems and the major denial blockages of addiction and alcoholism is when people are highly functioning, right? They are addicts, they are alcoholics, and they function highly. It's hard to give a real.
Well, maybe these family members are approaching this person, the addict, individually.
Correct.
We don't know.
So generally, a unified front is all important, and you have to really find a thing, because the majority of people that are actually high functioning in their addiction really understand they go by what the rules are. Like, the bills are paid, the kids go to school, they go to ballet, I never drive drunk, all these things, right? But you have to really dig deeper. You have to look at the things that affect them, because if they can get all their outside stuff in order, the effect is probably psycho-spiritual and emotional, and it falls on their children and maybe the husband. I guess the best way to answer this is to tell you a story, okay? And I'll try to keep it short. So maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I was hired to do an intervention with a family. And like all interventions, the family needs to be on the same page. Trying individual tactics doesn't work. You've got to come together, you got to have a unified front, and you got to have a plan. So I sat with the family for the pre-intervention meeting, and I had them write love letters. It's a type of approach where you write about how much you love them. And even though the things that they do are untenable, you still love them, but how it affects you, how it makes you feel that the love is not reciprocal. And the guy was a fairly wealthy businessman. He was very big in a Fortune 500 company. And he did his job. He paid for all his kids. They never went without, but he would come home, he would have his dinner, he would go to his study, he would start drinking, he would drink himself out cold in the study, never talking to the family, never engaging, and then go about his business the next day. And he did this every night and on the weekend. So I got everybody to write the letters, and they came back for the second meeting. And the daughter, who was 7 years old, wrote a letter herself, and it simply said, I feel like you don't love me. And I said, perfect. So we did the intervention, and everybody read their cost letters and their love letters, and he was adamant about, how dare you people are ingrates, everything's covered, everything's fine. And finally, the daughter read hers, and she added something that I didn't know about. And she read it, And she said, "Daddy, I love you, but I thought you hated me because you yelled at me after you ran over my bike." That was it. And that caused him to break his wall and shatter. That his daughter thought he hated her because of something he did. So you never know what's going to change the person. But generally, when they're pretty effective on their outside life, look for the entrance into the inside life. And as a unified front, approach that. Yeah.
And speaking of a unified front,
Oh, that's right. I forgot to mention that on the 6th of the next month, we are coming up on our family weekend again, and we're very, very excited. And again, this is something that without the Schnellenberger Family Foundation would not exist. All the family members of the and parents of the clients here at Recovery Boot Camp are flown for free and put up in a hotel where they get to spend a lovely weekend with me, harassing them in person, shaking fingers at them and telling them that they do bad stuff because they haven't learned the right stuff, and then teaching them the right stuff. And then they thank me, even though I was mean to them. And they get to have a really great time and maybe even have some conflict and interaction with their child. And that is cathartic in nature, and its boundaries are established. And we do this every month, and it's one of the beautiful things that RBC offers. And really, I've seen it at other places in micro, but I've never seen a facility that actually does it on their dime, because we understand in such a deep way that the necessity for the family to heal is the one thing that increases the probability of the patient healing as well. So again, we here at Recovery Boot Camp, thank you very, very much for tuning in. The Schnellenberger Foundation, we have huge gratitude for that. And understand that if you feel that anything that we say is possibly helpful to you and may be a help to a family member or a loved one, please reach out to Nick. His number's on the website, right? And you can reach out to him and be a part of the Recovery Boot Camp experience and family. And we want to teach you and instill in you and help you with the same amount of zeal and love that we do for the clients here at Recovery Boot Camp. So until next week, Avida Zane. Have a great night.
Yep, thank you guys. And just to let you know before we wrap up, we have over 600 people registered for this webinar, and that's really, really incredible. You know, we're honored to be able to do it, and we're so beyond grateful that so many of you are signing up. But keeping in that spirit, we want to reach as many people as possible. So if any of you have friends or family members or other people who you think could benefit from this, tell them to sign up. The more people that tune in, the bigger a difference we can all make together. So please share this with your friends, get the word out there. You know, we've only scratched the surface, and without you, none of this would be possible. So we're incredibly grateful. Please spread the word. It would make a big difference to many people if we can reach more. So we really appreciate that you guys are here, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, guys.